Operator syndrome number 45, doing another listener questions. We got two good ones today. Well, I guess one of them, actually, neither of these were really questions. One of them's one of them was more some clarifications we'll make to make sure we're not putting out bad information with regard to our Marine Corps friends. And then another one is just an interesting topic about regret from uh, a friend in Scotland. So let's start with the Marine one because we love our clarifications.
Absolutely.
It's our favorite thing to do. So uh, our buddy David here, who served in the Marine Corps and did some other cool things later on in his career, um, commented how we've mentioned the Marine Corps a few times in the reconnaissance community, and how we get some things wrong. And it was all in good nature, his response. But we asked him to tell us what we're getting wrong because we're happy to clarify it. So
Yeah.
let's talk about that a little bit. Did you first off? Did you interact? You talked about a school or two where you would interact with reconnaissance Marines. Had you worked with them? Would you say you extensively work with them, or just sort of here and there?
Just here and there at schools mostly. Yeah.
Mm,
Attended a school by a force recon gunnery sergeant, the
mhm,
spy rig course.
mhm, yep.
He was at the force recon group on the West Coast at Pendleton, and then worked with other force recon guys at Sodic and Sephartec.
Mm,
Um, but we were all students, so we were kind of peers.
mhm.
We weren't operational with those guys.
Okay. Yeah, I was Ranger buddies with a scout sniper in Ranger school.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know that he was in the reconnaissance community though. I would think that after graduating Ranger school, that probably was something opened up to him if he if he wasn't already.
Yeah.
But then again, don't know what I'm talking. Let's clarify. Don't know what I'm talking about. So that's just me making a guess as an army guy. But
Right.
a couple of things David wanted us to point out, and a lot of this I found pretty interesting. So his note, and I'm paraphrasing here. I took some notes. Is you have Marine, you have the reconnaissance battalions, which I
Hmm.
was tracking, right?
Right.
And then you have force reconnaissance. And I was aware that those were two separate things, but I guess for me, I've always been unclear about what that difference is. I guess I kind of assumed they were more or less interchangeable. And David's point is that that's not really the case.
Yeah.
Is that they have
Yeah.
um, pretty distinct mission roles within the community and different opportunities afforded to them. Um, so, the thing that surprised me is um, I knew that force reconnaissance were some badasses, right?
Yeah.
They're all badasses, but especially badasses. And so
Yeah.
they are the ones, I guess, who I guess everyone, battalion reconnaissance and force reconnaissance, they all go to the basic reconnaissance course. So there's that table stakes, there's that selection and that training to become a reconnaissance marine. But force reconnaissance is really where you get into the more exotic capabilities, is how
Right.
I would paraphrase it. So they're the ones that get the free fall and the dive.
Right.
They're the ones that have of course, a reconnaissance mission, but force reconnaissance also has that direct action role.
Hmm.
So David mentions VBSS, which you mentioned before, which is, I guess, the shipboarding
Yeah.
capability. And then CQB breaching, they do a lot of that stuff. And then I guess if you're force reconnaissance, that becomes a primary MOS. So for those who don't know, along your career, you go through certain training, and sometimes we were just talking about schools. Sometimes those are just like add-on things you're able to do. But for some courses, that becomes your main occupation.
Yes.
So what David's clarifying for us here is that for force reconnaissance Marines, like that's their job. That's what they
Right.
do. Um,
Well, that makes sense given that the guys I met were all force recon and we were in assaulting schools and sniper schools and doing essentially training to do the same kinds of missions,
Mhm.
surgical strike missions. Yeah.
What I'm and then so going back to the battalion reconnaissance, David was explaining to us how, um, in terms of like their role on the battlefield, the battalion reconnaissance Marines would be operating closer to and more directly involved with maybe your conventional Marine units, their reconnaissance needs versus force reconnaissance would be traditionally projected much farther forward, operating independently, maybe in smaller groups. So again, all this stuff that I found interesting, specifically where I've definitely been putting out the wrong information in sort of day-to-day conversations is I honestly thought that all reconnaissance Marines got to do dive and jump. I thought they all did. Um, maybe that's I knew force reconnaissance were they're sort of heavier hitters, so to
Hmm.
speak, however you want to term that. But
Right.
I had assumed that all, even the battalion reconnaissance folks jump, got to do free fall and dive, which our understanding here, and of course this is from David's time as well. Who knows? Maybe that information is timed out too. But it seems like for battalion reconnaissance, it's more of a if you get lucky, you're picking up dive. If you get lucky, you're picking up free fall, but it's not necessarily a capability of the reconnaissance battalions. So I
N-
found that really interesting because I've been telling folks because folks would sometimes people will come and say, well, why would I be a ranger versus a recon marine?
Right.
And during my time, the thing that I always say is, you're hearing a heater behind me. My fault for that. But in my time, I would say, well, if you really want to get into combat, you want to join the Rangers because that's what we're doing right now. And in terms of if you want to do a lot of cool schools, it seems like uh, Marine reconnaissance is a way to get those cool schools earlier on in your career, which, according to this, is not necessarily true. So,
Okay. That's kind of how I had it vaguely in my memory. The force guy, the battalion recon, I mean, was more tied to infantry support. Force guys were more elite in that they were training and were qualified to do pretty much some of them everything a SEAL was qualified to do as far as airborne, diving, scuba. Now, one question, and I don't know if David, because he followed up with you, I didn't get that one, but it's fine because we're doing it now.
mhm.
What two or three part question? We're all recon Marines, battalion and force, basic airborne qualified. Now I know the force guy. I don't ever remember seeing a force guy without Navy Marine Corps parachutist wings.
Mm,
So I'm assuming they are all at least airborne. If not, now Halo's a different subject.
sure.
That's a whole nother school. And I saw, and we're okay. So we're all those. Did he answer that one?
I didn't ask. You know
Oh,
what? And this is
yeah.
it's not going to stop me from hazarding to get David right in. Let
Yeah.
us let us let us
David, we
know if
need
we
to.
screw
We
this
need
up.
further clarification.
We need more clarification. I'm pretty sure they are
Yeah.
because when I went to jump school, we had we had Marines with us. Man,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure they were reconnaissance Marines.
Yeah.
But who can tell? You show up to a school, maybe you say you're something you're not. That's possible too. We were just dumb, you know, E1s, E1, E2 privates. So maybe someone was just flexing on us. But um, I would think so. I'm pretty sure, but I don't know. So we'll find out.
Well, the
Yeah,
other one would be we're all okay. I'm almost sure the force guys were all basic airborne qualified as a minimum.
I am will I will yes, I'm willing to co-sign. I will go 99.9 repeating percent sure that
I,
they
I
all are.
I never met one a force guy. A force.
I mean, how could you? I mean, because David says that
Yeah.
they are all free fall. They are all free fall and dive. You can't be free
Okay.
fall if you don't have basic.
Well, there we go. There's the answer to that one.
Yeah,
Yeah, of course. Okay, that's helpful. That's really helpful.
yeah.
I'd also like to know. Hey, my mind just starts turning. My wheels are turning. Like when MARSOC was stood up as part of SOCOM
Hmm.
command,
Yeah.
Um, were they just drawing from force, or did they open it up to a selection process for, or do you know, Patrick?
I know a very little bit about that because, like everyone else, I listen to other podcasts where some MARSOC Marines have discussed that transition. So, based on what I've heard, yes, they. My understanding is that they really drain the talent from the force reconnaissance companies to help establish what will become MARSOC.
Right.
And potentially, this is where I don't know, potentially even from battalion reconnaissance elements as well. Um, you know, when I was deploying in the early aughts, we had run into some at that time MARSOC Marines because they were standing up. So they were sending observers, MARSOC observers on our raids every once in a while
Hmm.
to just see how we do business while they were deciding how they were going to structure themselves
Interesting.
because they were developed out of a policy requirement versus a battlefield need.
Oh,
Um,
that's interesting.
so does I guess the Secretary of Defense at the time had said, "I want more special operators, Marines. You need to put some chips in the pot here. You need to contribute to this." And I've heard from again from podcasts from folks who so this is all secondhand information, but they describe it as the Marine Corps fighting that policy requirement, not really wanting to do it, very much comfortable in keeping what they had.
Right.
But so instead of a organic organization rising up, they were going along on missions with Green Berets, Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, going out with all of us to decide how they wanted to structure themselves. Um,
Right.
so we would have I remember a couple missions where we had a Marine Corps force reconnaissance slash MARSOC transitioning into MARSOC gunnery sergeant who accompanied us on a
Yeah.
few raids.
Yeah.
So
My time, it's come so far, just historically, not least. But I remember reading about MARSOC. I was asked to give a lecture, had a military history lecture at a university I was affiliated at the time, and the lecture was "Are Special Operations Troops Expendable?" question mark.
mm,
Whatever that means, you can
yeah,
interpret that a couple different ways, but and I did a whole lot of reading, but it was only reading. It was only like, oh wow, the new SOCOM has this element of MARSOC that was way after my time. So I know next to nothing about it. So I'm mostly asking questions. I feel like I should be better prepared when we do. I could research it online, but honestly, I mean, I'm a professor. I'm teaching classes. I'm lecturing. I'm grading paper. So I appreciate David to at least give us some guidance here.
yeah. It's
Excuse
we
me.
can't go wrong. We do our best work talking about what we know
Yeah,
and in
right.
the time period in which we said it. So we're going to try to we'll try to stick to that. But it's very interesting. Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's also interesting how 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 many assumptions we make about the different units, right? It's like I was like, oh, I assumed
absolutely.
all reconnaissance Marines had jump and dive, and I always that was always something I was jealous of. I was
Yeah.
like, man, they get to do that, and we don't get to do that. So,
Yeah.
um,
That's a great part of just as the podcast evolves. It's like I've learned so much about the Rangers that I had no clue about, really.
mm,
And yeah, putting those pieces together with battalion and force recon is an eye opener, as was RIP RASP Ranger School, being at a 75th Ranger Regiment, being at a battalion. Like I had no, I was just like, well, there's a Ranger, there's his tab.
sure.
But yeah, there's a lot to learn, really.
So, so appreciate that, David. Will it stop us from uh, talking about reconnaissance Marines in the future? Of course not. But we make
Yeah,
the effort. We make the effort to clarify as things come in. Okay, the next one, and maybe we dig into this one, is talking about. We got a note from a Ben in Scotland,
yeah.
and Ben wanted us to talk about regret a little bit. and Ben has a very
Mhm.
interesting story. Um, and I'll give some of it. We don't want to dox Ben here, but Ben's story is he was in college. He was going to college in 2000, and in that year, he had. My understanding is he had maybe done some preliminary testing or preliminary the process to become a Royal Marine, and he had ultimately decided that he ultimately changed his mind, I guess, and continued on with college. I don't know if maybe he was trying to go the officer route or whatever, but that's something he was considering, and he changed his mind. 2001 happens, and the war kicks off, and the way I read it is he sort of that maybe re reinvigorates
Mhm.
his sort of motivation. He's remotivated to maybe do the Royal Marine thing, and so perhaps he continues on with school, but says, "Maybe when I finish this up, I'm going to go do that." 2003, 2004 rolls around, and Ben is getting close to graduating. But if we remember what 2003, what 2004 looked like, it, it looked like a meat grinder, right?
Mhm.
So a lot of casualties, a lot of amputations, a lot of people dying. And, in his words, that was a factor in him deciding not to join the Royal Marines then.
Mhm.
Um, so he ultimately doesn't do that. I don't know what he does for his day job, but what he ends up doing is he joins the Royal Navy and becomes a diver, and he does 8 years as a Royal Marine diver. So I'm guessing maybe that's more um, what do you call it? Maybe sort of logistical diving than combat diving. I don't know what the right terminology is for that.
Well,
But
and he was an EOD diver,
okay, all right,
so that's significant. Explosive ordnance disposal for our
okay.
uninitiated listeners. Yeah,
So
that's disarming explosives.
he's doing that for 8 years, but kind of going back to the regret thing, he's still not, it's he's still not feeling like he's making the contribution he wanted to do. I wrote down here, he had some,
Yeah,
again, his words, some shame about
yeah,
not having, back in 2003, 2004, fighting, you know. So all that led him in 2010 to join the UK's equivalent of the FBI,
right.
working in investigations, intelligence, and he's doing a lot of really great stuff now. Really interesting work. Um, but he was still compelled to write the note. And in his words, he's saying, I've moved on, but he still has lingering questions about what if, you know,
Sure.
could I have completed that training, um, and and did I walk away at a time when I was needed, maybe to do that certain type of work. Um, so yeah, I that's probably a pretty common story,
Yeah,
except for the fact that Ben has gone above and beyond in service to his country to his country. He did the 8 years as the diver in the reserves. All right, good enough. Great, great work.
yeah,
And then he goes even further to do intelligence, law enforcement, and intelligence work. So um, he more than then you more than made up for whatever failings you think you had earlier on. But I wrote down a great quote from him, which was, again, his regret was around maybe more so not testing himself, and I think by that he means the training itself, but I think he also means combat
right.
is what he's really saying. He had the opportunity, he had the want to do it, but then he decided not to, and he thinks about that, even though he's done all these great things
Yeah,
since then. But I wrote down a quote, and I think it's fantastic. He says, you can't do everything you set out to do when you're 17,
yeah,
and he's comfortable in his place as he should be. he's comfortable in the service that he's done and the decisions he's made in life, and he's um, more or less forgiven himself for some of the decisions he made when he was younger. Any thoughts? Any initial thoughts on that?
Well, for one thing, just ditto most of what you've said. As I read it as well, the email, I just thought, a thank you for your service, right? You you served, and not only in the capacity of the military, but in the capacity of very important criminal work, investigative work, and tactics and stuff like that, like connected with the UK's version of the FBI equivalent. We're not using the same terms. So, man, thank you for your service. That the fact, one of my thoughts was the fact that it burdened your conscience that you maybe hadn't gone, lost a limb or gone down range and really engaged in some hairy fighting. That right there tells me that you have a good heart for service. It's almost impossible, and yeah, to go back and what if stuff. I'll say this: I have regret. uh I struggle with some regret. I think everybody struggles with some level of regret, even if you served, even if you didn't, or were on the fence of serving and never did. um I will, to my dying day, I will wonder, should I have gone to Dev Group? I was selected to go to Green Team. My enlistment was up. I really wanted to go to college, and I pulled the plug on it. I got out, and that's something that will kind of haunt me for the rest of my life, and maybe it ought to. I don't know. So there's so many levels of potential regret, but you know, you're a patriot, and I can that sense comes through your email, and I think it's a type. What you're dealing with, and what Patrick and I deal with, is a type of survivor's guilt, we call it. Um, I had, I guess, probably three. One really close brother who is no longer with us, and a couple others who I really was pretty close to, um, who 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 were killed in action, and they're such good guys. And I tend to look. I don't know, for better or for worse, I tend to look at guys as better than myself. I try to see excellency in others, and no matter what. And I heard a podcast once with a SEAL giving himself a grade, and like, yeah. And this was a pretty accomplished SEAL, right? And he said, I give myself about a C. There were guys that got A+s. There were guys that got F. I give myself about a C plus. And I felt the same way. Could have done a lot more. And I was talking to my friend Kevin, who did his whole career in the SEALs, including Dev Group for the majority of his career. And he was telling me, I don't think it mind me telling, he's dealing with one morning. He his wife just looked at him. She's like, "It's one of those days," and he's like, and I said, "What's up, man?" And he said, "I can't feel my arm, my left arm. It's just completely numb." He'd been to the NICO clinic for TBI, and he all kinds of stuff. But I'm just like, damn, man, how often does this happen? He goes, "Yeah, I never know, and just suck it up, right?" And wow, I mean, just to the levels, there's so many different levels that people suffer with. It kind of made me feel like, well, I got some back issues, I've got some shoulder issues, but geez, my arm doesn't go numb every day. So I guess wrapping it up, my initial comments are just that I think we all on some level deal with survivor's guilt if we have a heart for our country, which Ben clearly does, and I know Patrick and I do. So
Yeah, you know, you don't want to read too much into any letter because, or email. I actually said letter, the email. You don't read into
yeah.
any one email. But yeah, I agree the same thing. We all do. We all have regrets. Could we have done more? Should we have done more? I talk to folks all the time who again, Ben, come on. You were a diver. You're doing the investigator thing, right? And he knows that. And he
Yeah.
knows it. In his notes, he says that too. But that you shouldn't. You will, because you're that type of guy, and that's great.
Yeah.
Steve was saying, that's just part something in you. But you have absolutely nothing to regret. We all serve in different ways. Um, it's frequently I talk to folks who didn't who maybe didn't serve at all, who
Hmm.
carry a similar type of regret. Um, and like you were saying, what people don't understand is, um, for a lot of us, maybe a majority of us, um, it's never good enough. You where whatever you do, whatever you decide,
Yeah.
it's not there is always someone who did there's always some you're always gonna be able to find someone who
Oh
did
yeah.
more, who served better, who served more than you.
Always.
Well, so you're always gonna deal with that, and, that's just something you gotta get used to, exactly like Ben said, again, his quote, "You can't do everything you set out to do when you were 17." You know, the when you're young, there are so many opportunities and so many things you want to do and you want to accomplish. And then with time, you begin to understand that you're not going to do all of those. And certain decisions you make close out certain opportunities, more or less. Um, and so, the regret thing is we all feel it to some level. And in terms of service, regret around service, um, you know, you if hearing it from us helps, we're telling you whatever you did was good enough. You know, if you put on a uniform, and we've said this before, if you were the water purification specialist, thank you for your service. You did your job. Somebody needed to do that. My grandfather he was an infantryman for a while, but he was a cook. He was a cook in the army during the Korean War. Like, nope, he served, we needed people to do that, and he was a great guy, you know, and so, if you did that, if instead you were a cop or a nurse or a teacher, or if you were just, a good husband, father, and you went to your job doing whatever it is you did, completely unrelated to service, but you tried to be a good person, hey, we needed that too, you know?
Yeah.
So, um, you're
You
gonna
know,
have regret, but try to put it in context, I guess.
yeah. Yeah, my my own father, who's a real patriot. He loves the country. And he was of age. He was in college, uh, when the Vietnam draft was huge. And he tells me to this day, he would have served. He wasn't a draft dodger. He wasn't trying to burn his draft card, nothing like that. He would have gone, and with you know full in. He was in college and he was married. So I don't know how the system worked, but it put you in different categories,
Mhm.
like 1A, 1B. I don't quote me. It was this rating system. And he was still headed to Vietnam. He was supposed to report to a MEP center for a physical, to be shortlisted to go to Vietnam. And then actually unexpectedly, my mother became pregnant with me. And that bumped him into a different category.
Nice.
And he ended up never going to Vietnam. And every Veterans Day, he always sends me a text to thank me for my service. And I think if I could read between the lines a little bit, and I don't want to read too much between the lines, that there's a little bit of sadness that he didn't go and join the cause, uh, that his fellow countrymen were joining, even though Vietnam was a really rough time for a lot of people. But he
Mhm.
he would never have hesitated. And but the funny thing is, you just can't look back and you can't look over your shoulder with too much regret. I mean, it's always there as an emotion, but
Right.
for for whatever it's worth to whoever, not only Ben and his concerns, but I don't think shame should ever enter into it. I know
Right.
we've all felt shame, but that's all it is. It's a feeling, and I don't think it's a tremendously good one. I think it it's not necessarily something to be cultivated, but the bottom line is, if my mom, I might not, I wouldn't be here, um, and have served in the capacity as a Navy SEAL, and I might have, like I say, looking over your shoulder, I might have saved my dad's life. I might have never existed. I mean, yeah, had he gone to Vietnam, it's just a weird
You
thing
need
to,
to use it. You need to use it.
yeah,
Like, Dad,
yeah.
I saved your life, man.
I
Like
do
you
that.
should when you were a kid, you should have been like, "You're gonna yell at me about my room,
That's right.
dude."
I do that even to this day. I say, Dad, never forget, I saved your
Yo,
life.
let me say something off of that. Is that because a change in perspective helps sometimes, right? So, and I got an example tied to family members. Um, those of us who were in some precarious positions, right? Um, most of us wouldn't want our loved ones to be put in that same position,
Yeah.
right? So take my brother, for instance. My brother joined the army 2 years after I did, and he ended up serving as a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne Division. Um, the the time in which he came in and the rotational cycles of the 82nd at the time, he he never ended up he was supposed to go to Afghanistan to do one of those 12, 15-month deployments, and, like, I was scared. I was worried to death about him going to Afghanistan. Um,
Yeah.
like, that was terrifying to me. Here I was deploying back and forth doing my thing, but that's fine because it was me. But the idea that my little brother was gonna do that was absolutely terrifying. You know, what happened was his I don't know if it's brigade, I don't know. Once it gets bigger than regiment, then I start to lose the army thing too. But they were supposed to go to Afghanistan, but that earthquake in Haiti happened. I don't know if you
Oh,
remember this.
wow.
I
Yeah.
can't
Oh,
remember.
yeah. I remember
Maybe it was like '09 or 10 around that time, 8,
around there.
9, 10. There was that big Haitian earthquake, and so they got flexed to go to Haiti to do the humanitarian support.
Hmm.
And I I was elated. I was so happy. I was like, "Thank God." I saw it as a blessing because I did not want him to go to Afghanistan.
Right.
And, you know, for that perspective change for anyone who has maybe regret around specifically around serving or combat or whatnot, as much as you may have wanted to or thought you wanted to, there's an equal and opposite force that's going against that, which is, your loved ones, people that care about you. They just as much didn't want that for you. Like I didn't want that. My brother wanted it. I didn't want that for him. You know,
Yeah.
so when he ended up doing that, and by the way, that Haiti deployment was no picnic, no infrastructure. There
Mm.
was a lot of death around that earthquake. A lot of things that he hasn't even disclosed to me, only vaguely. Like it was not pretty what they did, and they were serving. So should those guys who did that Haiti deployment and help to provide stability and help to bring a country back up to stand on its own 2 feet again, should they feel like their service was any less than
Hmm.
a ranger or SEAL doing a combat pump? No, absolutely not. No question about that. So, just maybe a different perspective to think about too.
Really good point. Yeah, perspective is really helpful. Yeah, yeah, just looking at the different angles and the different, um, and sharing our stories with each other. Hopefully, maybe this helped Ben a little bit. I think he's squared away.
Ben's good to go. Ben, you're doing too much.
Yeah, don't beat yourself up.
Yeah, you're doing too you've done more than us at this point. So you're good. You're good to go.
Yeah, and I'm jealous because Edinburgh, Scotland is one of my favorite places on the planet. Been there several times in such a gorgeous city. When I visited the first time, I walked up the Royal Mile to the castle on the hill, and it was right at sunset. And these, well, they were military, but it was the changing of the guard. And right when they change guard, this guy starts on the bagpipes, And I was just like, whoa, man, my hair stood up and I was like, oh, this is cool. So anyway, I'm jealous of where you're located right now. If you're still in Edinburgh, but you're in Scotland somewhere. So
Uh, Thanks, David. Thanks, Ben. Appreciate the notes. If you've got something, operator syndrome podcast at gmail.com. That's it for today. We will catch you in the next one. Bye.
see ya.